I didn't realize my children had forgotten about me until the day I noticed how quiet the house had become. At first, I told myself the silence was normal. Children grow up. They move out. They build their own lives. That's what we spend years preparing them to do. But there's a difference between your children growing up and slowly disappearing from your life without you even noticing when it started. And one evening, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I began to understand that those two things are not the same. My name is Robert. I'm 70 years old, and I still live in the same house where my children grew up. It's a modest house, nothing special by most standards. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a backyard that used to feel a lot bigger when the kids were small. When my wife and I bought it more than 40 years ago, we thought it would be the place where everything important would happen. In many ways it was. Both of my children were raised here. My daughter, Laura, and my son, Michael. For years, the house felt like it was always full of motion. Doors opening and closing. Footsteps on the stairs. Laughter drifting out of the living room late at night. Back then, I used to think the noise would never end. Of course, life has a way of changing things quietly. Laura was the first to leave. She moved to another city after college when she got a job she was very excited about. I remember helping her load boxes into the back of her car. Her room looked strange once the posters were gone and the shelves were empty. "You'll visit all the time, right?" I asked her that day, trying to sound casual. "Of course, Dad," she said with a smile. "I'm not disappearing." At the time, I believed that. And for a while, it was true. She came home for holidays. Sometimes for weekends. She'd bring stories about work, new friends, places she had discovered. The house would fill with conversation again for a couple of days before she drove back to her apartment. Michael moved out a few years later. He didn't go as far away. Just across town, really. Close enough that I thought we'd probably see him often. Close enough that I imagined spontaneous visits, maybe dinner together during the week. "You know where I live," I told him when he left. He laughed and said, "Dad, you're acting like I'm moving to another country." For a while, life settled into a new rhythm. The house became quieter, yes, but not empty. My wife and I had time to ourselves again. Evenings felt slower. Sometimes we'd sit in the living room watching old movies or talking about the things we never had time to talk about when the kids were young. Back then, the distance didn't feel permanent. It felt temporary. Like the beginning of the next chapter. But time moves faster than we expect. A few years later, my wife passed away after a long illness. That was when the house truly changed. Grief does something strange to a home. The rooms are the same, the furniture is the same, but everything feels slightly out of place. The silence becomes heavier. The nights stretch longer. In those early months, my children called often. Laura called every few days. Michael came by some weekends to check on me, sometimes bringing groceries or fixing small things around the house that I didn't notice needed fixing. Their attention meant more to me than I probably admitted at the time. It made the house feel less empty. But life kept moving. Laura's job became more demanding. She started traveling more often for work. Her calls became shorter. Michael started a family. 2 young kids who quickly became the center of his world. And little by little, the rhythm of our lives began drifting further apart. At first, it was easy to explain. People get busy. That's what everyone says. Busy became the word that filled every space where time used to exist. "Sorry, Dad, it's been a crazy week. I'll try to call you this weekend. We've just got a lot going on right now." I always answered the same way. "Don't worry about it." And I meant it. Parents spend years telling their children not to worry about them. We teach them to be independent, to chase their opportunities, to build lives that extend beyond the walls of their childhood home. But there's a quiet part of us that still hopes those lives will circle back from time to time. At first, the changes were small. Laura stopped visiting for random weekends. Her trips home became mostly holidays. Then some holidays passed with only a phone call. Michael stopped dropping by after work. The kids' activities filled his evenings. Soccer practice, school events, birthday parties. Whenever we talked, he always sounded rushed. "Hey Dad, just calling while I'm driving." Those calls lasted 5 minutes at most. But I still looked forward to them. The strange thing about distance is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly. A missed visit here. A shorter phone call there. Each moment seems reasonable on its own. But over time, those moments begin to add up. One winter evening stands out in my memory more than most. It was January, cold enough that the windows had a thin layer of frost around the edges. I had made dinner earlier, nothing complicated, just soup and a piece of bread. After I finished eating, I carried the bowl to the sink and glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. That's when I noticed something. The last time Laura had visited was nearly 6 months earlier. 6 months. I stood there looking at the calendar for a long time. Not angry. Not even sad yet. Just surprised. Somehow, the months had passed without me realizing how long it had been. I tried to remember the last time Michael had come over with the kids. I couldn't. That realization settled quietly into my chest. Later that evening, I sat in the living room with the television on, but I wasn't really watching it. The house felt bigger than usual. That's something people don't talk about very often. When children grow up and move away, the same house can suddenly feel enormous. Rooms you used every day become spaces you rarely enter. The upstairs hallway, once filled with footsteps and music drifting under bedroom doors, becomes a place you pass through without stopping. Sometimes I walk past their old rooms and notice small things I never moved. A book left on a shelf. A drawer that still holds old school papers. For years, I left those things untouched. Not because they were important objects, but because they reminded me that life here once felt different. The moment everything became clear happened on my 70th birthday. Birthdays feel different when you get older. You don't expect parties or big celebrations. Most people your age have learned to keep expectations simple. Still, there's a quiet hope that someone will remember. That morning I woke up early like I always do. Made coffee. Sat by the window with the newspaper. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang. It was my neighbor wishing me a happy birthday. We talked for a few minutes about the weather and the snow that was supposed to arrive later that evening. After we hung up, I went back to the kitchen and waited. Not consciously at first. But the phone sat there on the table, and every time it buzzed with a notification, my attention snapped toward it. No call came that morning. By the afternoon, I told myself my children were probably busy. Laura lived in a different time zone. Maybe she was still asleep. Michael might be at work. Evening came. The sky turned dark outside the living room window, and the snow started falling exactly the way the forecast predicted. Still no call. Around 8 o'clock, the phone finally rang. It was Michael. "Hey Dad," he said. "Sorry I missed your birthday earlier. I just remembered when I saw something online." His voice sounded tired. We talked for a few minutes. He told me about the kids' school projects and how busy work had been lately. Before hanging up, he said, "We should get together sometime soon." I said I'd like that. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a while. Laura never called that day. It wasn't until the next afternoon that she sent a message. "Sorry I missed your birthday yesterday. Hope it was a good one." That was the moment I finally understood something I had been slowly avoiding. My children hadn't forgotten me because they didn't care. They had forgotten me because their lives had moved forward in ways that no longer included me as often as before. And somewhere along the way, I had quietly stepped out of the center of their world. For a long time, that realization hurt more than I expected. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet moments. When I walked through the house at night. When I cooked dinner for one. When I saw other families sitting together in restaurants or parks. I began to wonder if I had done something wrong. If maybe I hadn't been present enough when they were younger. If maybe distance was the natural result of something I hadn't noticed years ago. But the truth, I eventually realized was simpler. Children grow up. They build their own routines, their own responsibilities, their own families. The life that once revolved around you slowly shifts until you become one small part of a much larger circle. And that circle keeps expanding. A few weeks after my birthday, Laura finally came to visit. It wasn't planned far in advance. She called one Saturday morning and said she was in town for a conference. "I thought I'd stop by if you're home," she said. When she walked through the front door that afternoon, the house felt alive again for the first time in months. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee the way we used to. At one point she looked around the room and said something that stayed with me. "This place feels exactly the same." I smiled and said, "Some things don't change." But later, after she left, I realized something important. The house hadn't changed. But our lives had. And that wasn't necessarily a tragedy. It was simply time moving forward. These days, my children still call from time to time. Sometimes we meet for lunch. Sometimes weeks pass without hearing from them. But I've learned something that took me a long time to understand. Love doesn't always disappear when people move away. Sometimes it just becomes quieter, less frequent, hidden inside small conversations and occasional visits instead of daily life. And if you listen closely enough, those moments can still remind you of something important. Even when your children build lives far from the house where they grew up, a part of them will always belong to the place that first felt like home. And for me, that's enough reason to keep the lights on, just in case they decide to come back for dinner someday.